So we're continuing this week our character study. In doing so, let's always remember our 4 keys: audience, time frame, background, and style. We looked last week, we started our character study. We looked at allies and enemies. We looked first at the allies of the saints of Asia Minor. We had in chapter 4 God sitting on his throne, being worshipped by all of the heavenly beings. It wasn't anyone on earth being worshipped. It was God, God alone. In chapter 5, we saw the Lamb, who is also worthy of worship because the Lamb was the only one worthy to open the scroll, which we know to be the rest of the story. And in contrast, we have the first of our enemies that we saw last week in chapter 12, the great red dragon, who was Satan. We talked about the motives that this dragon or Satan has through the story. We talked about Satan's attempt to stop the plan of God, Jesus coming to earth, bringing salvation, and failing, and continuing to persecute the offspring of the woman, the saints in Asia Minor, after that. And now coming out of that chapter, we move into chapter 13, which is where we'll be tonight. Like I said, we're continuing our character study. Tonight we're going to look at 3 more enemies to God's people in this battle. These enemies are going to be fighting on the side of Satan with the dragon. So we're going to start tonight in chapter 13, like I said, with the first of the 3 enemies that we're going to look at tonight, starting with the sea beast. So start reading with me at the beginning of chapter 13. And the dragon stood on the sand of the seashore. Then I saw a beast coming up out of the sea, having 10 horns and 7 heads, and on his horns were 10 diadems, and on his heads were blasphemous names. And the beast which I saw was like a leopard, and his feet were like those of a bear, and his mouth like the mouth of a lion. And the dragon gave him his power, and his throne and great authority. I saw one of his heads as if it had been slain, and his fatal wound was healed. And the whole earth was amazed and followed after the beast. They worshipped the dragon because he gave his authority to the beast, and they worshipped the beast, saying, "Who is like the beast, and who is able to wage war with him?" There was given him a mouth speaking arrogant words and blasphemies, and authority to act for 42 months was given to him. And he opened his mouth in blasphemies against God, to blaspheme his name and his tabernacle, that is, those who dwell in heaven. It was also given to him to make war with the saints, and to overcome them. And authority over every tribe, and people, and tongue, and nation was given to him. All who dwell on the earth will worship him, everyone whose name has not been written from the foundation of the world in the book of life of the Lamb who has been slain. If anyone has an ear, let him hear. If anyone is destined for captivity, to captivity he goes. If anyone kills with the sword he must be killed. Here is the perseverance and the faith of the saints. So this scene opens up with the dragon, Satan, standing next to the sea, and out of the sea comes this beast. So let's describe real quick, as we've been doing with the past visions, let's describe what we see, what John sees, the appearance of this beast. Go ahead and describe it. Throw some things out. Okay, 7 heads, 10 horns. The horns have diadems on them. It's like a leopard, feet like a bear, I heard. Mouth like a lion. Yeah, so going through some of these things, we have the 10 horns, alluding maybe to power, similar to the dragon last week. The 7 heads, alluding maybe to intelligence that this beast has. The 10 diadems being on his heads, diadem being another word for a crown, showing that this beast has some sort of rule or authority to him. He has blasphemous names written on the 7 heads. He appeared as a leopard, feet like a bear, mouth like a lion. These are all animals of great strength and of great power. And one of his heads was slain, but the wound was healed. We'll talk more about that in a minute. Now let's describe the action, what this beast does. Again, throw them out there. Speaks great blasphemies. What else? The power to wage war with who? The saints. Speaking about the saints in Asia Minor specifically. What else? Authority over the entire world. Yeah, these things are all nations and all tongue. Yeah, these things are important. And this beast, it says, works with the dragon's authority. So very clearly, this beast is working with Satan, as we've already said. The dragon is giving the authority that he has to this beast. Stephen? Correct. Yeah. And we'll get there in a second. I'm not overlooking it. He speaks words of arrogant words and blasphemies, as Stephen mentioned a minute ago. This guy is insulting God, straight out insulting God and speaking arrogant words. He thinks more highly of himself than he ought to. He has authority for 42 months. This number of 42 months is significant. We actually saw it last week, but we didn't talk about it. It's mentioned twice in chapter 12. It was mentioned in a little bit different ways, though. After the woman gave birth to the child that Satan tried to devour and failed, the woman fled to the wilderness, it says, for 1,260 days, which is the same as 42 months. Again, later in that chapter, we see that the woman is continuing to be persecuted after Satan fails at stopping God's plan of salvation from coming. The woman goes to the wilderness and she's given protection for time, times, and half a time, 3.5, which is also equivalent, 3.5 years, to 42 months. These are all the same time frame being talked about, and it's significant. As we've mentioned before, numbers are important. They carry a meaning. So 3.5 is the important number that we're looking at here. 3.5 is half of 7. Okay, keep up with me here. We have 7, which we said was the idea of completion, perfection. And now we have half of that. We have incomplete. We have imperfection. So the idea being carried through all 3 of these uses here is, I'll go through each one of them. The woman, once Satan failed to prevent God's plan from coming about, before Satan had another chance at coming to her, she was given protection for 1,260 days. Or, excuse me, let me back up. This was before, after Satan was unable to prevent the child from being born. The woman was given protection, but it wasn't complete protection. As long as she remained on earth, Satan would eventually be allowed to come at her again, which we saw. It was not complete protection. Later in the chapter, the dragon came after the woman again, and she was given safety for time, times, and half a time, 3.5 years. Again, it wasn't complete protection. There was an ending to that protection because Satan again was allowed to persecute her. And now we see the same time frame here again described about the authority of this beast. The authority of this beast was incomplete. It was imperfect. There would come an end to it, which is significant. This beast has authority, but it will not always have authority. As was mentioned, this beast makes war with the saints and overcomes them. This clearly puts this beast on the side of the enemies. And he has authority over every tribe, people, and tongue. I'll go ahead and skip over that for a second. Before we get more into that, What was the people's response to this beast? How did people respond to this beast? They marveled at it. They worshipped this beast. People were accepting. The whole earth was amazed and followed after him. The world was worshiping this beast. And we're told that through worshiping this beast, they're worshiping Satan, the dragon. With all of these things in mind, that leads us to the question, who is the sea beast? Any ideas? The Emperor of Rome. That's exactly right. We're looking at the Emperor of Rome. Given the times and the description, there can be no doubt that we're talking about the head of the empire. But again, as was mentioned, this is a specific aspect of Rome. It's not Rome in general, it's the emperor. It's the head of the empire. And at this time, that's being epitomized by Domitian. Now, the evidence that we have for that is clear. He makes war with the saints. We know, given the historical context, Rome was doing this. They were waging war with the saints, fighting against the saints, forcing the people in Asia Minor to do what they wanted, and to follow them, and to be on their side. This beast has authority over every tribe, people, nation, and tongue. This was the Roman Empire. They were over the entire world. There was not one person in the world who did not answer to the emperor of Rome, at least on earth. He spoke blasphemy and arrogant words. We know Domitian claimed to be God. He claimed that God was not God. He was. He was supposed to be worshipped. He thought of himself very highly. And he is worshipped. People were worshiping him. At this time in history, people were worshiping Domitian as a god. And the description in verse 1 fits this very well. The horns of power, the heads of intelligence, the diadems showing rulership. It all fits the interpretation of this being the emperor. It also mentions the fatal wound. Without getting into too much detail about this fatal wound, there are a lot of different theories, but the most popular is that one of, or many of these heads were Nero, who was in power for a time and then was removed from power, either forcefully removed or death, and that applied to multiple emperors over time. And that this fatal wound is simply talking about the coming and going of power. When one emperor comes down, it seems as if this political headship is defeated, but the wound is healed. Another emperor takes its place. So let's not get too specific with it, but it's simply the idea of the coming and going of this beast's power. Ultimately, it continues. And after describing the actions of this beast, it's important to note that the saints are told that they must accept their fate. Whatever it is, even death. Don't resort to worldly methods to protect yourself. Don't resort to the sword, or you will receive the sword. They're not supposed to do that. Again, another warning for them. The sea beast represents the emperor, the political headship of Rome. But we're going to see another beast. That was the sea beast. Now we're going to look at the earth beast for the second half of this chapter. In chapter 13, starting in verse 11, read with me about the earth beast. Then I saw another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had 2 horns like a lamb, and he spoke as a dragon. He exercises all the authority of the beast in his presence, and he makes the earth and those who dwell in it worship the first beast, whose fatal wound was healed. He performs great signs, so that he even makes fire come down out of heaven to the earth in the presence of men. And he deceives those who dwell on the earth because of the signs which it was given him to perform in the presence of the beast, telling those who dwell on the earth to make an image to the beast, who had the wound of the sword and has come to life. And it was given to him to give breath to the image of the beast, so that the image of the beast would even speak and cause as many as do not worship the image of the beast to be killed. And he causes all, the small and the great, the rich and the poor, the free men and the slaves, to be given a mark on their right hand or on their forehead. And he provides that no one will be able to buy or to sell except the one who has the mark, either the name of the beast or the number of his name. Here is wisdom. Let him who has understanding calculate the number of the beast. For the number is that of a man, and his number is 666. 666. The earth beast. Let's describe him. Again, throw out some descriptive things that we're told about him. What was that? He spoke like a dragon. What else? I didn't hear that. I'm sorry. 2 horns like a lamb. The description of this beast is a lot shorter than the first one. We're told he has 2 horns like a lamb, and he speaks as a dragon. Okay, we got both of them. Okay, the description's a lot shorter. Here we're focusing much more on the action of the beast, which is what? Okay, has the authority from the first beast. What else? Deceives all of mankind. What else? Performs great signs. That goes along with the deceiving. What else? Tells those on earth to make an image to the first beast. This beast acts with all the authority of the first beast, okay? His authority comes from the first beast. He makes the earth dwellers worship the first beast. He's enforcing that worship that first beast demands. He performs many signs, deceiving the people that are on earth. He even makes fire come down from heaven. These are all signs intended to deceive man. He tells earth dwellers to make an image to the first beast. He gives breath to that image. That image can speak because of what this beast is now able to do. He kills those who do not worship the first beast. And he causes everyone to receive a mark on their forehead or their hand, the number 666, which, don't worry, we'll talk about in a minute. So with these actions, who is the earth beast? What was that? Okay, he is a false prophet. The Roman emperor cult. You guys are nailing this tonight. It's the false religion, the emperor worship cult that follows the empire. Okay, so we're looking at Rome again, but it's a very different, very specific aspect of Rome. This beast symbolizes the false religion and the cult that goes with the emperor worship at this time. And also, as was mentioned, this beast is later going to be known as the false prophet because of what he does. He's leading people away from God and to the first beast. Now, the evidence for this being the cult of emperor worship, he makes everyone worship the beast. We know this was happening. If you remember back to week 1, I told you stories about the koinon in certain cities, and there were other groups as well whose task it was, their sole job was to go out and make sure people worshipped Domitian. They would do anything they could. They went out to find those people who were not and make them. And he would punish those who didn't. These people were doing that. Remember back the story week 1 that I told you about the man and his wife and his children being brutally punished. His family was murdered. because they were not willing to worship the first beast. He gives breath to the image of the beast. I also need to mention before that, the Koinon and other groups, as I mentioned, week 1, they were setting up images of Domitian and other emperors, using those as things for people to worship. They were what gave breath to that image, meaning that image came alive. Emperor worship was truly alive and living as a culture in these people. It had no power unless somebody was there to enforce it. And these people were doing that. He was performing many wonders. Now, I don't want to get too specific with this. It's very easy for people to try to start attributing these to very specific things in history. But I think the general idea here is simply this beast was doing something. These people were doing something to convince people to worship Domitian. Whether people believed it because they believed it or believed it out of fear, doesn't matter. Either way, these men were doing something to encourage people to go the wrong direction. And that's what these wonders are really talking about, again, without getting too specific about it. What we have here in chapter 13 are two great beasts, one representing the emperor, and then another representing those enforcing the power of the emperor. Again, two aspects of Rome, two very different aspects of Rome. And I don't want to go any further without mentioning the mark of the beast. I'm sure you've heard of the mark of the beast. This is all over the place. The numbers 666. If you haven't heard those numbers from somebody, I'm very surprised. They're all over the place. This is one of the first things people want to talk about when they talk about Revelation and the prophecies and things that come about. If you look back in history, people on countless occasions have tried to figure out what this number is, to link it to something in history, to determine what it means. A few examples, just so you kind of know what I'm talking about. When Social Security numbers were introduced in our country, people said that's the mark of the beast. That's the number of the beast. Satan is putting his mark on us. Move forward a little bit. There are companies and people wanting to implant microchips into people to help identify who they are. Everybody's in panic because that's the mark of the beast. That's the number 666. Satan is making his mark on us. What's the problem with those interpretations? One of many problems. They're what? Correct. They're getting outside of our time frame. They're making it something that's ongoing. What else? What other problems are there with making those claims that that's what this is talking about? Correct. There is a specific historical context here. There is a purpose to it, which goes to say as well, if we take it outside of its time frame and we make it something like a microchip in our arms, what good does that do the saints in Asia Minor? How in the world were they to understand that or to even begin comprehending or making a message out of that? They couldn't. So to correctly figure out what this is, and Stephen alluded to some of it, what do we know? What does the text say about this mark? Throw some things out there. For all people, everyone is supposed to have this. What was that? You can't buy or sell without it. Correct. And that's an important point there, is when people see nowadays, when they see the number 666, everybody's reaction is, oh, it's Satan. There's the number of Satan. That's not what it was. It's not the number or the mark of the dragon. It's the mark of the beast. This is connected to the earth beast. Again, everyone is supposed to have it. It's on the right hand or the forehead. No one can buy or sell without it. And this mark can be the name or number of the beast, 666. So, what does it mean? I suspect that John is not trying to be nearly as fancy as people try to make this text be. They try to make this something very elaborate and connect it to things in history where Satan is trying to mark people. I don't think it's quite that specific. Revelation, as we've mentioned, is about great conflict. There's conflict, two opposing sides battling each other. And in the book, each side has a mark that identifies it. Everyone is marked in some way to identify which side they were on. This mark of the beast merely identifies that you are on the side of the beast. You are with the beast. Many people fail to realize that even the faithful saints of God have a mark in the book. It's not just a mark of the beast. There's a mark of God in the book as well. We're going to look at it next week in more detail. But in chapter 7, it says, "Do not harm the earth or the sea or the trees until we have sealed the bondservants of God on their foreheads." In chapter 14, right after this, "Then I looked, and behold, the Lamb was standing on Mount Zion, and with him 144,000, having his name and the name of his Father written on their foreheads." This is talking about something very different. This is talking about the faithful, the saints of God, being given a mark. So we run into a problem when we try to make this 666 mean something literal. Try to make it a literal mark that people wore or had on themselves, because none of us have anything written on our foreheads tonight. To be consistent, if the number 666 is literal and is being seen on people, then each person in this room is supposed to have something written on their forehead. But we don't, and we know that we don't. So this 666 cannot be literal. It has to be figurative. And going along with the things that we mentioned a minute ago, everybody kind of touched on it a little bit. Think back to what you missed out on if you were not associated with the Roman Empire. We talked about it week 1. You were immediately recognized if you were not with the emperor and Rome. Everybody knew it. It wasn't because of something written on your head or because of something not written on your head. Everybody just knew. It was this just taboo label that they placed on people, a figurative label, so that everybody knew that person is a traitor. We can't talk to them because they don't have the mark of the beast. They're not with us. The people who were labeled as traitors, Christians, could not sell things in the market. You couldn't do business. We talked about all this week 1. It all fits the description of how Christians were treated if they were not with Rome. That's all this number is. It's a figurative mark to recognize who is on what side. And 666 simply is just what's associated with the Roman Empire, because God's people had a mark as well. And 666 was an appropriate number to do so. At this time, the number 6 had a symbolic meaning. It carried an evil connotation, or an imperfect connotation, similar to the way 13 is in our culture. It was a negative number. So, if you're going to give a number to the bad guys, it makes sense that this number is what was chosen. It's not a literal number. It's a mark. I pointed this out for 2 reasons. 1, we need to talk about the mark of the beast and know what it is. But 2, this is a great example of people's inconsistency in their approach to this book and the interpretation. It's very clear, like I said. If it's going to be literal in one sense, it has to be literal in every other sense. So if it's not literal in any sense, it's literal in none. This is not going to be a literal meaning. We've talked about 2 enemies thus far. We've got one more. We're going to skip over to chapter 17. We're going to skip a little bit that we're going to come back to later. In chapter 17, we've got the fourth and final enemy, the third one we're looking at tonight. We have Babylon, the mother of harlots. Let's go ahead and read chapter 17. Chapter 17. Then one of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls came and spoke with me, saying, Come here, I will show you the judgment of the great harlot who sits on many waters, with whom the kings of earth committed acts of immorality, and those who dwell on the earth were made drunk with the wine of her immorality. And he carries me away in the spirit into a wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast, full of blasphemous names, having 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman was clothed in purple and scarlet, and adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls, having in her hand a gold cup full of abominations, and of the clean things of her immorality. And on her forehead a name was written, a mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots, and of the abominations of the earth. And I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints, and with the blood of the witnesses of Jesus. When I saw her, I wondered greatly. And the angel said to me, Why do you wonder? I will tell you the mystery of the woman, and of the beast that carries her, which has the 7 heads and the 10 horns. The beast that you saw was, and is not, and is about to come up out of the abyss and go to destruction. And those who dwell on the earth, whose name has not been written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, will wonder when they see the beast. And he was, and is not, and will come. Here is the mind which has wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sits. And they are 7 kings. 5 have fallen, 1 is, and another has yet to come. And when he comes, he must remain a little while. The beast, which was and is not, is himself also an 8th, and is one of the 7, and he goes to destruction. The 10 horns which you saw are 10 kings, who have not yet received a kingdom, but they receive authority as kings with the beast for 1 hour. These have one purpose, and they give their power and authority to the beast. These will wage war against the Lamb, and the Lamb will overcome them, because he is Lord of lords and King of kings, and those who are with him are the called and chosen and faithful. And he said to me, The waters which you saw where the harlot sits are peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues. And the 10 horns which you saw, and the beast, these will hate the harlot, and will make her desolate and naked, and will eat her flesh, and will burn her up with fire. For God has put in it their hearts to execute his purpose, by having a common purpose, and by giving their kingdom to the beast until the words of God will be fulfilled. The woman whom you saw is the great city, which reigns over the kings of the earth. So we're looking very specifically at this woman called Babylon, the mother of harlots. Let's describe this enemy. Throw out some descriptive things we know. You up? Clothed in purple and scarlet. What else? She's a harlot. Important point. What else? Adorned with precious stones and gold and things. What else? Slaughters God's people. What else? Holds in her hand a cup of abominations and unclean things. This woman is sitting also on a scarlet beast, which we'll talk about in a minute. She's clothed in purple and scarlet and precious stones. These things are attractive things. She has in her hand a gold cup full of abominations and unclean things. She has a name written on her forehead, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and the abominations of the earth. And she is drunk with the blood of the saints and the witnesses of Jesus. Looking at this description, what are some fundamental things that we learn about this woman? Very simple things. She's rich, okay, which has appeal to some people. What else? She's powerful. Okay, she's an enemy of the saints. We're getting very specific here. She's drunk with the blood of the saints. Clearly, this puts her on the dragon side of the conflict. She is an enemy. She's, due to the nature of her being, she is associated with immorality. Why do I say that? She's a harlot. She's a prostitute. She's immediately, by saying that, associated with immorality. A prostitute also in her hand a cup full of abomination and immorality. She's associated with immorality. She's depicted riding a scarlet beast. This beast has 7 heads, 10 horns, and filled with blasphemous names. Let's look real quick at that beast. If we describe this beast, it has 7 heads, 10 horns. The earth dwellers wonder about this beast. The 7 heads are 7 kings, 10 horns are 10 kings. He wages war with the Lamb. Skipping too far. Looking at these things, do you immediately recognize who this beast is? Sounds just like the sea beast. You know why? Because it's the sea beast. The description is the same. It has 10 horns. It's filled with blasphemous names. This is the same description that we had of the sea beast a minute ago. So this woman, this prostitute, is riding on the back of the sea beast. Okay, riding on the back of the political power of Rome, which is important. There's a lot of different things that are associated with this beast. Let me back up here real quick. Looking at this description, there's a lot more detail given to us about the beast. Since we already looked at it, I don't really want to go into too much detail about the things given here, but I will pick one of them out, which kind of sums up a lot of it. It talks about the 7 heads being 7 kings, that 5 have come, 1 is, and 1 is about to come, we're on number 6. The 7th is about to come. Kings, alluding to the authority and to the rulership of this beast. 7, as we said earlier, brings about the idea of completion, of perfection, the ending. We're getting close to the end of this group of kings. We're almost to 7. The rulership associated with this beast is almost over. We're nearing the end, which is important in this context because it means that this beast is about to go away. This woman is riding on a beast that's about to go away. I'm repeating it for emphasis for a reason. That's important. This beast is going to wage war with the Lamb, and he's going to lose, along with the harlot. So we mentioned who the beast was. It's the sea beast. So now, who is the harlot? Rome. The other 3 have been Rome, so it's a safe answer to say that it's Rome, and that's correct. Yet now we're looking at another aspect of Rome. So these beasts, we have 3 different aspects of Rome. The first, the sea beast, symbolizing the political power at the very top. Beneath that, the earth beast, enforcing the power and authority of the first. And now we have this woman, yet another aspect of Rome, but this time focusing more on the immorality of the empire. It is a prostitute associated with this empire. Not a specific prostitute, it's not what I'm saying. But the idea of what a prostitute brings about is being associated now with Rome. The corruption of Rome, the immorality of Rome, the impurity of Rome is really what's being focused on with this enemy. It's obvious to see that this woman is being associated with immorality, and that we're looking at the immorality of Rome. Her occupation, a harlot, a prostitute, we've already said. The cup that she has, filled with unclean things and immorality. We know immorality is rampant throughout the Roman Empire. All sorts of immorality. We've got people worshiping a man as God. We talked about week 2 and 3 about some of the things that were going on in these cities, the events, the banquets, the sexual immorality, the different things of this culture that were luring people away from God. And that's where the description of this woman really helps us to get the picture. She has precious stones and gold. She's rich. She's alluring people. She's enticing people in. This was an immoral culture that was pulling people into it and pulling people into Rome. And that's the third enemy that these people are being faced. Now, some people get caught up here in this chapter with, if we say that the sea beast is Rome, and we say that the woman is Rome, how can Rome be riding Rome? It can be a complicated image, but if we really break it down, it actually makes perfect sense. Remember, the false religion of Rome could only be enforced with the authority that Rome had. Rome had an authority. They were over everyone, and that authority was being enforced. And so now the political power is helping to support and enforce these immoral things. We have immorality being carried along and brought to everyone by the political power of the empire. Without the political power of the empire, all of these immoral things would not have a foundation to grow on. Which is why I said a minute ago that it's important to note the beast is almost gone. The political power being discussed here is almost gone, so the immoral things that are going with it, they're going to disappear as well when the beast does, because they're riding on top of the political power. It's what's carrying them. So we've gotten to the end of this lesson. Does anybody have any questions or anything real quick before we continue? Yeah. Yeah, and that's alluded to multiple times with those hills. At the end, it talks about this is the city who stands above all others. Everything is pointing at Rome. I mean, there are so many things throughout the description of these beasts and this woman and the dragon as well. To make it clear, we're talking about Rome, which is what makes it very important as we look at all of these things. Remember our 4 keys. We're talking about Rome. We're dealing with Rome. We're dealing with these saints in Asia Minor. We're dealing with the 1st century. Everything is being kept within this time frame. All these other interpretations that are outside of that cannot be the case. We have to keep it within this scope. We've discussed the allies. We've discussed the enemies. This brings us to the end of the first section of the class. If you remember, I told you we were going to spend many weeks setting the stage. This brings us to the end of that. Next week, we're going to get into the story. We're going to skip back to chapter 6, and the story is going to progress. The things of the book are going to start being unfolded, and now we know who the key players are, the crucial roles in that story, which will help it make a lot more sense to us. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next week.